Have you ever felt so hungry that you considered eating something that, until that moment, would have disgusted you just to look at? Let me take you inside the ships of the great navigations, where the smell of mold and sweat mixed with despair. When the supplies ran out, what remained was a menu that would make anyone prefer death. But they couldn't die. They had to keep going. Even if it meant eating their own belts, locked inside wooden vessels, cast adrift at the mercy of winds and currents, ordinary men crossed oceans in search of lands that might not even exist. They carried poorly drawn maps, blind faith, and food stocks that didn't last beyond the first few months. After that came silence, constant nausea, fever, and hunger. At first, there was still dry bread, hard as stone. It was called sea biscuit, made only from flour and water, baked for long hours to withstand time. As the months passed, these bits of dough became a home for larvae and weevils. They would bang the biscuits on the table, hoping the insects would fall out. It didn't always work. Some sailors ate without looking. They said it was better not to know. The water, once fresh, rotted in the barrels. It grew slime. It was drunk with eyes closed, as if that could change its taste. And when the water ran out, they drank anything. Sweat, rain collected in cloths. Some even tried distilling salt water, but the crude methods often only made them thirstier. Rats took over the holds. They fed on leftover grains and multiplied. In the shadows. Over time, they stopped being pests. They became resources. Sailors hunted them at night, roasted them over weak embers, skinned them, and ate the meat still half raw. The smell of burning fat, mixed with the scent of candles and the mold of damp sails. The surviving accounts of these voyages are not just descriptions. They are muffled screams on paper. Some wrote of men chewing leather belts. They cut strips from their boots, boiled them in seawater, scraped off the mold with dull knives and chewed as if it were meat. The texture was rubbery, almost impossible to swallow, but it gave a false sense of fullness. It fooled the stomach for a few hours. Monet. One of Ferdinand Magellan's voyages, in the far south of the Americas, boiled leather was the only food source for days. The cold was unbearable, the winds cut like razors, and many fell ill. The captain wrote that some men even tried to boil sawdust with seawater, trying to make a broth that resembled soup, all in vain. Over time, their bodies began to deteriorate. Scurvy swelled their gums, rotted their teeth. Wounds wouldn't heal. And yet those men kept sailing, kept eating what there was to eat, even when what was left could no longer be called food, nor dignified, nor human. Their eyes sank in. Their ribs protruded beneath the skin. Silence took over the decks, and even the sound of the waves seemed to mock their frail bodies. Only hard choices remained, and each day was a new negotiation with death. The ocean was infinite, but unforgiving. Day after day, the sails swayed under the relentless sun or the persistent rain, and beneath them, men bent over empty pots, scraping off the last dry crusts, praying for a shore that never appeared. Hope was a line on the horizon, but hunger was inside, ravenous, crawling. Scurvy took over. One by one, the sailors fell. Those who still had strength tried to keep the sick clean. The food, scarce and rotten, no longer distinguished between the living and the dying. On some ships, they even squeezed pus from wounds to study it, as if the answer to their collective decay could be found there. It wasn't. With the holds empty and the barrels dry, the cooks, or what remained of them, were forced to improvise. They concocted mixtures with ashes, wood shavings, tar, and even fragments of tallow candles. Men chewed these substances until their jaws ached. Many vomited immediately after, but swallowed again. The body rejected it, but the mind commanded. Candle tallow became a food source. Made from hardened animal fat, it was melted and consumed as a viscous broth. The mixture dripped down the men's beards like rancid oil. It was warm but not nourishing, thick but not sustaining. Even so, it was all they had. On smaller vessels, like those used by private explorers or corsairs, even more grotesque accounts have emerged. Men hunted seagulls, gutted them with dull knives, and ate their entrails raw, still warm. Blood dripped across the deck and stained the wood. The birds' cries were swallowed by the sea, yet echoed in the nightmares of those who slept or pretended to. Some seabirds, like albatrosses, were seen as omens of bad luck. Still, they were devoured. In one Portuguese voyage, it was recorded that a crew member ate raw albatross meat and hours later lost his mind. He tore out his own hair and tried to leap off the ship. He was restrained by others, but did not survive. The night. They blamed the meat, but deep down they knew it was the hunger. There was also the case of a Spanish ship whose logbook reported the boiling of human leather. One of the sailors had died from scurvy. With no means to bury the sow body, it was kept in the hold. Some say parts of him were removed, secretly cooked and shared in tiny portions. The accounts are vague. The captain forbade any further records after the event, but the rumors endured. Once, a desperate cook created what they called rat and rope stew. It was a concoction of boiled rats mixed with rope fibers to add texture. The rope was made from hemp, soaked with saltpeter and sweat. The liquid was black. It was bitter. It was served as if it were gold. When land finally appeared on the horizon, the men didn't cheer. They wept. Some fell to their knees. Others simply collapsed. Their bodies scarred, their eyes sunken, their teeth rotten. Nothing about them seemed human anymore. They had survived, but no one quite knew how, or at what cost. The sea took many, but those it let return came back, changed, as if something had been left behind, something that could never be reclaimed. Eventually, the ships docked. They reached the long-sought new lands, but they didn't always find what they had hoped for, and when they did, it was often too late. Many of the men who had set out were no longer the same. They had left parts of themselves along the way, and not just in necrotic limbs or digits lost to disease. They had left behind their dignity. In the Chronicles journals, there are notes about how some men refused all kinds of meat even after returning. They would gag at the sight of fat, shiver at the sound of meat sizzling. One man, after 5 months at sea, was seen eating saddle leather despite a feast laid out before him. He could no longer eat like before. He no longer trusted abundance. Another sailor, a Frenchman, described trauma that made him wake up screaming at night, begging them to stop putting rats on his plate. He was home, but had never truly left the deck. Food to him was no longer pleasure. It had become fear. In the ports, rumors spread. Survivors of the voyages were said to be dangerous, savage, almost beastly, and perhaps they were to those who had never sailed. But the truth was that they were marked by what they had done to stay alive, eating worms, tallow, feathers, spoiled meat, boiling the soles of their boots into soup. As trade routes expanded and voyages grew longer, European kingdoms tried to improve their supplies. They developed smoking methods, studied herbs to preserve meat, and tested barrels sealed with wax. But hunger always found a way. There was always one longer stretch, one unexpected storm, one lost ship. And when that happened, the old habits returned. Even on dry land, colonizers had to adapt to new foods, strange herbs, bitter roots, unknown fruits. Yet all of it was better than the horror of the months at sea. Still, many remained ill. Some died just weeks after arrival. Others went mad. Healers and doctors began to notice a new kind of suffering, a void that food could not fill. They called it seasickness, but it wasn't the ship's motion that caused it. It was the memory of what they had eaten, of what they had become. In some rare cases, reports claim that sailors continued to consume unthinkable things even on land, as if addicted to the sensation of starvation. One Portuguese man, returned from an Atlantic expedition, was found days later eating rats in the cellar of his own home. He had abandoned his family, said it was safer this way. Time passed, the ships changed, the methods evolved, but the accounts remained. In old books, in yellowed journals, in forgotten manuscripts, buried in maritime archives, there, hidden among dates and maps, lie the stories of a menu that should never have existed. And even today, centuries later, all it takes is to look out at the vastness of the sea, to imagine yourself in the middle of it, isolated for weeks, to understand that In the absence of everything, humans eat what they can find. And when there is nothing left to find, they eat what should have been forgotten, because some hungers never end, some last forever, and they leave, in the mouth, and in the memory, a taste that never fades,